Welcome to the show, where today we have an awesome guest from Wendy Wellington joining us. We have Brandon Palmer, who is the marketing manager at Hnry. He joined the company as employee number 12 and is now part of a team that's about to top 100 members of staff. We're here to unpick everything from managing small budgets and growing into big ones, the transition from performance marketing to brand marketing, but importantly, making sure that you've got the right team around you, the approach to building a marketing team robust enough to carry you forward. So without further ado, let's join the conversation. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Brandon, super excited to talk through some of your background on your journey as a marketer and at Hnry. We obviously know each other from our personal lives, as well as kind of crossing over at points in time professionally as well. So you're really looking forward to picking your brains and hearing a little bit about your journey. Take us away. Let's get the elevator pitch on Brandon Palmer, who you are and where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, sure. I'm from the States. I got into marketing randomly, which I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people just sort of fall into marketing. For me, it was like I knew someone who was starting a company and they were hiring a bunch of people to help with marketing, specifically like SEO and content. So I came along for the journey and sort of haven't looked back. It was mostly like SEO and content marketing stuff in the States, and I moved to New Zealand, and I got a job at the TAB, which is the sort of local gambling authority. This is a New Zealand audience, so they probably already know that. Just had a really great manager, like one of those managers who really challenges you to sort of look upwards and sort of try new things and experiment and upskill. And so I got like a really broad sort of digital marketing skill set, I guess I became a bit of a generalist in terms of the skill set, but then in terms of my focus area, my sort of strategic thinking, it was very sort of customer acquisition focused, which is what the TAB was all about then. And so those two qualities, the sort of generalist in terms of marketing, and the customer acquisition mindsets, made me like a really perfect fit for Hnry, because they were sort of small. They were looking to hire their first marketer. And so they needed someone who could do sort of like all the things in terms of marketing, but they were looking for customer acquisition, of course. It was a really nice fit for me to come and start and be the first marketing resource at Hnry. I was employee number 12. So on the ground from the very early days at Hnry, when we were just a small group of people in a tightly, tight office space. Haven't really looked back with them. Like, it's been a really amazing journey growing with Hnry, growing myself and growing Hnry into being like a really big company.
So for those listening who live under a rock, could you take us through a little bit about Hnry and what you do, what the business does?
Yeah, of course. So what are we? We are an accountant and tax automation tool for sole traders. That's the really succinct way of putting it. So I guess it probably would help to describe who sole traders are. So sole traders are anyone who's self-employed. So think, independent contractors, freelancers, tradies, anyone who works for themselves and doesn't have a company structure around their business, is a sole trader. And traditionally, they've been on the hook for managing all of their tax and financial admin themselves. They don't have that company sitting over the head of them, over the top of them, sort of managing their tax payments and all their tax obligations for them. And so it's always been like a huge point of stress for anyone, especially people starting out as a sole trader for the first time. And the existing tools in the market, when Hnry was founded, were just not up to snuff at sort of helping them manage those obligations. Like, is always just stressful, a lot of work that they had to do themselves. And so Hnry was in a prime position to come and disrupt this sort of ecosystem by automating a lot of those obligations and processes that they needed to do. So we sort of automate all the tax payments and do all the tax filings for them. So when they get paid, a lot a lot of sole traders will sort of send invoices as their payment trigger, but that's not all of them. But they'll get an invoice paid. It'll come into their Hnry account. We'll calculate, deduct, and pay all of their taxes for them automatically. And then the rest comes to them. So they've got that peace of mind knowing that all the payments that come into their bank account have already been taxed. They're not going to owe any surprise money at the end of the tax year. And then we also become their accountants, and we'll sort of file their taxes and do all their GST returns and all that niggly stuff for them throughout the year.
I mean, it's a fantastic product. I know it through a few of the people on in my sphere. In fact, producer Louis, who's recording this at the moment, uses Hnry. He's a huge advocate.
Actually?
Yeah. And that wasn't a plant, I promise. So the business has gone through a pretty major growth phase through which you've been kind of leading the charge from the marketing camp. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's been So when I first started out, the marketing budgets we had were $10,000 a month, and I was obviously the only employee. And now we've got a team of, I think, 9 marketers now total. I mean, I think we've got 8 or 9 people working for us, and then we've got a whole heap of people that we use sort of externally, contractors, freelancers, and our budgets are much bigger than $10,000 a month.
I won't ask you what the specific number is, but
I won't get into it.
Suffice to say, it's probably grown a few zeros.
That's right.
So take us through a little bit about that journey. How have you gone through, I guess, navigating that growth as a marketer? Understanding the difference between being the guy on the tools and doing all the work in those early days to now presumably kind of standing at the front of the orchestra and, conducting.
Yeah. It's, the transition point probably, I mean, there's been lots of transition points along the way, but the first hire is really where that sort of transition started, when I stopped being sort of accountable to myself and started having to hire people to support me, around me, and do the things that I could do myself, but do them much better. Because, I was always a generalist. I could do lots of different things, but I could do them sort of okay. I could do them pretty well. But as you start growing a team, you need to hire specialists who can do the things, like the one thing or the 2 things, and they can do those things really well. And that's part of building a team. So you need to be comfortable, or I needed to become comfortable with hiring people who were, better and smarter than me in those particular ways.
So what's the makeup of the marketing team? Like, what are the different skill sets that you have within the Hnry camp?
Yeah, it's probably worth going through a sort of list of who we've got. Probably won't be too many surprises here, but we've got a digital marketing manager, a brand manager. We've got sort of an SEO and website specialist, someone who manages SEO and our website, column 1. We've got a written content specialist who publishes the articles and stuff on our blog. We've got a social media specialist. We've got an email marketer who does sort of the sort of nurturing of the leads that we get, the sort of signups we get into the Hnry app. And we've got a marketing coordinator who sort of helps with a lot of different, like moving a lot of different marketing pieces around.
And what was the order? Like, what order did they come on board in? Who was that first hire?
Yeah, the first, and this has a lot to do with because we were a startup, and so the co-founders were sort of heavily involved in a lot of the day-to-day stuff initially. And so one of the first things we wanted to do was get one of the co-founders, James, off of like managing the website, because he had been managing the website. And so the most important thing was just freeing up his time more than my time. And that was, so we hired Alicia, who's our website extraordinaire. She now and for several years now has looked after the website in a really masterful way.
It is quite interesting, that website piece. It's that resonates with me, certainly from our side. Just knowing that, it's often one of the first things that people like to try and take off of their plate.
Yeah, I mean, imagine trying to market without having a website, right? Like, what would we be without a landing page?
I mean, particularly for an app, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
One of the things that you and I have kind of had a little bit of a chat about this conversation before we started, but hiring is one of the things that you've kind of flagged as one of the major milestones in that growth journey from sole marketer to really running a department. What are your kind of like takeaways from that space? Have there been any major moments along the way where you think, oh God, I wish I'd known different or would have done that different? What have you learned from hiring a team of 9? And presumably, I guess there's been a few kind of ins and outs along the way as well.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, hiring is crucial. Like it's such a I think of it as a really high stakes game. And no moments in particular that I want to highlight, but maybe I'll just go through and maybe talk generally about it. But like, I don't know, you just really want to get hiring right. And I've been really fortunate, and we've been really fortunate at Hnry, for our marketing team. We've hired some amazing people, both like culturally and sort of technically, sort of professionally. So we've built like the marketing team right now has just a fantastic culture and vibe and great sort of capability across the team. So very fortunate, and not a lot of like negative things to call out in the hiring space. And that it's important to sort of call out that it's not lucky that that's happened. It's due to the process that we have hiring people at Hnry. There's a whole process that we have to go through, and I had to learn that from the people around me. The co-founders in particular were very like put a lot of emphasis and rigor behind our hiring processes, and I found that quite frustrating at first, right? Like I thought it was just a two-step process. You hire people and you go faster, right? But that's not the way it works. Even if you hire the right person, in fact, like initially you go slower, right? But if you hiring the wrong person, like it can take, and I haven't really experienced this myself, but I've seen it from, other teams and other businesses, that hiring the wrong person, it can take you months to sort of even get back to the pace where you were going before. And even then you're not going faster, right? So it's really high stakes, and you need to trust the process, or I needed to trust the process that the co-founders had put in place.
And I love the fact that you touch on the fact that it's like making good hires. There's always going to be a leap of faith component to that, but making sure that you're approaching that hire with, I guess, clarity in mind of what you need from the role, what the values are that they need to fit within. So, like, how far, if you look at it from a marketing perspective, how deeply entrenched is the culture within your marketing team? Like, what's the link back to the business strategy there? Because culture fit, values fit, work ethic, all of that sort of thing, that often stems down from something that sits beyond the marketing team.
Yeah, that's right. It's the whole business's vision, values, which are quite strong. And Hnry is a very attractive place to work in the first place, because we're solving like a genuine problem, like a real pain point. Like before I worked for Hnry, I was working for the TAB, and I was helping people become gamblers, and that wasn't very fulfilling at all. No shade on the TAB. Like gambling can be quite fun, but now I work for a company that sort of takes this huge pain point that people have in their lives and just whisks it away. And like that, people like our customers love us because they get such peace of mind and such stability from being a Hnry customer. Our co-founders like to tell the story of like the first couple of Christmases after starting the business, where the customers would like literally send them bottles of wine and cakes, because they didn't think they were paying enough money. They were just so grateful that this service existed. But then back to the vision and values, the co-founders resisted putting vision and values in place for a long time, because it wasn't, sort of amenable to the sort of nimble, quick way of working. But as you grow, I think the vision and values become more important as you're extending that hiring responsibility to people that aren't the co-founders. And so I don't know. There's a few of the values that really speak to me, and that I sort of, when I look at the marketing team right now, I'm like, oh, we really embody these values. And one of them is that we're all grown-ups. We're all sort of self-sufficient, and when there's a problem, we all try to solve the problems first. We try to solve our problems ourselves before putting our hand up and saying, "Hey, I need help with this." We're all sort of trusting each other to go out and sort of do our own work. And of course, there's help that can be had when it's asked for, but generally speaking, we expect people to sort of go and figure stuff out on their own. And the other one is like, we don't take ourselves too seriously. So there's no room for egos at Hnry. we expect people to be sort of lighthearted. We have a very bantery team culture, which makes for, I genuinely look forward to coming into work every day because it's just such a fun team vibe to have.
That's awesome, and it makes such a difference as well, particularly with with people who are in that sort of like creative space as well, which arguably marketing is. Being able to actually be themselves and bring their own minds to the work that they do, I think it makes such a big difference. Looking through that journey, like you said, you entered the business really with a generalist and a really, really strong digital skill set, and I know your digital skill set. And starting out with small budgets, growing and growing and growing and growing. How has that journey gone? Because in parallel to growing not the business, you've grown your team. That is that like classic producer manager dilemma space. But then also, I guess the bigger your budget, the bigger the expectation. So you've got, I guess, multiple layers of complexity. How did you go about navigating that, or how have you continued to go about navigating that?
Oh, it's been really challenging, actually. It's probably worth like just talking about having small budgets, because at the time I was like, it sucks having a small budget. It's terrible. But looking back now, I'm like, man, I had it easy with a small budget. Things are so much more like simple and efficient and lovely with a small budget. And I should probably preface this by saying that, clients and anyone who's worked agency side can testify to this. Clients with small budgets like really, really deeply care about what happens with that budget. Like they really like feel the wins and losses from those budgets, right? And much more so than the other agencies clients who have like 10 or 100 times the size of the budget, right? So yeah, we really cared, like at that sort of early stage, what happened, what were the results from the $10,000 we spent every month. But with a small budget, you get huge advantages and huge efficiencies over your competitors, and that comes from being able to be really selective about where that money goes. So firstly, you really need to understand your audience. So target audience, you need to understand who your highest value customers are. This is obviously sort of a customer acquisition sort of minded or framing of this problem, but you really need to understand your highest value customers and your lowest cost to acquire customers. So just being like relentlessly focusing on who your customers are, and then just sort of refining that over and over and over again. For us, it was contractors and freelancers were our two sort of early adopter, high efficiency, high value customers. There's a million types of sole traders, but we just focused on those sort of two broad-ish types of sole traders, and that was really valuable for us in the early days at Hnry. And then, in terms of being really selective with where that money goes, you also think sort of channels, and all you're doing with $10,000 a month is just focusing on two channels. It's just those two performance channels, right? It's SEM, Google search, and Meta. And like, if you're spending anything outside of those two channels, for most businesses at least, you're just wasting money. Or you're just being less efficient than you could be. Especially for a startup that has no real brand awareness. Like SEM is fantastic because it's just capturing that demand that's in the work. You just find the keywords that align with your pain points and your customers. So for us, that was like freelancer tax and freelancer name of competitor. And those types of keywords were just hugely efficient for us. And we put the vast majority of our SEM spend into those types of keywords and got massive, huge gains from those.
And then from the Meta perspective, what were your go-tos there?
Yeah, Meta's different. Meta's less. It's still demand capture, but Meta's just a brilliant platform for advertising, just because there's great targeting options. You can really get aligned, like you can just get Meta aligned with what your conversion triggers are, and just get Meta to focus on getting more of those conversions. And Meta is really, really, really good at that.
So then as the business has grown, particularly in the B2B sphere at the moment, everyone's hot and sweaty about the whole concept of the 95-5 rule, that, focus on the 95% that aren't in market yet, while also converting the 5% that are. So, when you talk about your initial kind of kickoff phase there, you're focusing very much at the bottom end of the funnel, people who are, problem aware, maybe not yet solution aware, but really kind of snagging people who are at the pointy end.
Yeah.
How has that focus changed and shifted as the brand has grown?
Yeah, I guess there's two sort of things happening here. So like when you're spending $10,000 a month, like you're better off just capturing all that demand and just providing amazing service to those customers, because what we're talking about with that 95.5 is creating future demand, right?
Yep.
And one of the best ways that we found to create future demand is to just provide outstanding service to our customers, because they go on and they talk to their friends and family, and they do that brand awareness piece for us. So that's really one of the success points that we've had, is providing great service, and then the word of mouth just sort of takes care of that brand awareness itself. It's been a huge part of our success.
But now I would compare that with my ride home from work yesterday, when I followed a bus home on my bike that had a great big Hnry ad shell on the back of it.
Yes.
So that's going way beyond word of mouth. So
Totally.
how does that piece fit?
Yeah. And the problem comes when the investors or the boards want us to go faster, right? And so and this is usually sort of following an investment round, where suddenly like the budgets are no longer 10,000 because everyone wants to go faster, and they double to 20,000. And the first time they double, it's not such a big deal. Your costs per acquisition go up a little bit, but you're like, yeah, we should still just be using these two channels and these same target audiences. It's all good. And then they double again, and your cost per acquisition, suddenly you're spending 40K, and you're like, oh, our cost per acquisition went up considerably there. It's still within our efficient range. Like, we're still overall happy, but it is a little concerning that the cost per acquisition went up so much there. And then you get challenged to go even faster, and suddenly you're spending 80 to 100K per month, excuse me. And you just hit a wall, right? Like suddenly the performance channels just give out, because you're spending way more than there is demand in those channels. And so every additional dollar you spend on Meta isn't giving you any marginal benefit. Like, there's literally no benefit you're getting. You might as well just cut that money and not spend it at all. And so suddenly we were like, shit, we have to find new channels. And so I don't know, it was just a conversation between me and the CEO back then, I think. And it was just like, should we buy some bus backs? we didn't know what else to do. I'm simplifying. Like, we tried a bunch of different things, but like one of the first like big ideas, and I call it a big idea, but like one of the first like new things that we tried was just putting 30K into some bus backs in Wellington. It was like a hyper like geo focused campaign. Bus backs ran for a month. There were a few billboards as well. It was smart to like put all that into a tight geographic area. But then I was looking at the performance, and you have to remember that I was sort of stuck on that addiction of the performance marketing, where you spend $1 and you know exactly what you got for that dollar, right? And I'm like looking at our signups from Wellington in the weeks following that bus back campaign. I'm like, we're not getting anything. Like, this is a complete waste of money. And the problem, like, and you're probably getting there a lot earlier than I did, but the problem was that I'm holding a brand marketing play to performance marketing standards, right? And brand marketing, again, to that 95.5, is all about creating future demands. And performance marketing is all about capturing on that existing demand. And this was a lesson that I just had to learn the hard way. It took me a long time to sort of learn that brand marketing has different KPIs and different goals than performance marketing. And now we're in a pretty good place with it, where we do invest a lot in brand marketing. And this is particularly helpful in our new territories. We're now in Australia, and we're doing a lot of brand marketing there because that's the best way for us to sort of grow the long-term trajectory of Hnry faster than it would be if we just focused on performance.
So, like you talk about the performance marketing metrics, and you're all over them. Even just the language that you use tells me that you'd probably have within 50 cents a pretty good idea of what customer acquisition should cost you guys. But
Yes.
how do you then approach quantifying the impact of brand? Because this is one of the big challenges is as the pendulum, I think, swings from that performance space into the brand space, is, well, marketers, and particularly B2B marketers, have got to be able to justify the work that they're doing. But how do you send that up the chain? How do you put that in the pack that goes to the board that says, yep, those bus backs were a good choice?
Yeah, I mean, part of marketing is letting time pass and letting, you cannot tell this story immediately, right? You need time. And sometimes when you try to tell the story too soon, you get yourself into trouble. And so it is a little bit asking for a leap of faith from the board and the execs, but they're experienced investors, and the co-founders of the company are experienced at running companies, and we've been on this journey together. So yeah, I think we've got to a good place now where we know that, and back to sort of how you quantify the impact of brands. Like initially, like there's time frames, right? In the first as the brand campaign is going live, all you're looking for is like your cost per views and how efficient your impressions and website traffic and all those metrics are. You're just looking at the sort of effectiveness. And then you can start doing, a little later on, you can start doing things like brand recall and sort of brand awareness metrics. But again, like that's nowhere near converting into actual signups and actual activations, new customers coming through the door and actually paying for the service. That comes 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months later, right? And that's only something you can learn by going through that 12, 18, 24 month period, and then like seeing that. So that Wellington bus back campaign, for example, we didn't see the benefits of that for at least 6 months, probably a year, and then we started noticing that Wellington is showing a little stronger affinity for we're able to spend more in performance marketing in Wellington than we are in Auckland relative to the size of the population. Why is that? Does it relate to the bus back campaign? Maybe. Yeah.
But I actually love that as an approach to quantifying long-term demand generation, is using the performance piece as a gauge that says how much demand can we possibly spend on. That's a really, really neat approach to actually, I suppose, trying to quantify that. Are there any other tools? Do you guys use like Google Trends and things like that just to monitor brand search? Anything else that you kind of throw into the mix?
Yeah, we used Tracksuit to sort of monitor our sort of brand awareness over time. We're still relatively new to using it. The best, I mean, as you've already sort of caught on, the best way we use to measure the effectiveness of brand stuff is just how much can we spend on performance channels in those areas, which I think is by far the best measure of how successful a brand campaign has been. Like what's the sort of, what does Meta think about how efficient you are in those areas where and this is why when you're doing brand campaigns, you need to be, you can't just go nationwide. You can't just put little money everywhere. You need to spend in sort of tight geographic areas. So then that's how you sort of get a sense of the effectiveness of that brand campaign, is you can then observe what happens in performance and other things in those geographic areas. So even though we're spending quite a bit more money now, we're still usually going with a geo-specific approach to our campaigns.
And I guess that's about just focusing that budget on an area where you've got enough visibility, you've got enough frequency to actually be making a difference. And the fact that you then pair that up with the performance piece means that the work is inherently revenue and sign up and sales metrics focused, it's an awesome approach. I really like that.
Yeah. Thanks.
So where does creative fit into all of this? Because you guys do things a bit differently.
Yeah. Um, and this has been refined over years. We've we've operated under many different models, but the way we've ended up now is that we still, and this applies to many of the ways we think we sort of operate, is that we still think of ourselves as a startup. Um, yeah, it's a fantastic mindset. And so with creative, um, the way I'd characterize our creative sort of production machine is that we are nimble and we are quick to get creative out the door. Um, and let's compare. If you think about the way like a big corporation does creative, right? They start with like a very formal creative brief that's taken at least a week or two to write. That's filled with data and spreadsheets and sort of a business challenge or a business case or something like that. That creative brief gets approved and it goes to an external agency for scripting, and then the script needs to come back and sort of go through about 30 review cycles with legal and risk and brand and whatnot. And then only at that point, which is like, at least a month after starting, are you in pre-production, and you're still like 6 to 8 weeks away from having the assets back with you. And so when that's your model, doing anything sort of topical is kind of out of the question, right? Like you can't react to current events because it's going to take you 3 months to sort of respond, and by then the zeitgeist will have moved on. So our mindset is that speed is very important in terms of creative. And so we can, and we're slower than we used to be, but we can get a new piece of creative out the door in 7 or 8 working days, something like that, from the time that sort of concepted up to the time it sort of goes into our digital channels. And what this means is we often don't go for big production value. I mean, most people are watching on a phone anyway, so production value not as important as it was 20 years ago, and it's important to remember that. But because we're going fast, we get faster learnings. We're able to get more creative out, so it becomes a little bit more iterative. We can do topical stuff, and then we have more creative, a higher variety of creative in the funnel, and we get efficiencies from that because having a bunch of different creative and types of creative is really valuable in meta when your audience is really big.
And am I right in thinking that you've brought some of that creative production in-house? Like you have your own in-house creative team? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So we do a lot of the work in-house. We still use a lot of external. We like to sort of, I like to think of it as sort of, reinforcing the value of being a freelancer and a contractor. We like to engage contractors and freelancers. It helps us stay in touch with who our customers are and support that way of working. But yeah, whenever possible, we bring roles in-house. So we have our brand manager who does a lot of the scripting, and then we have a sort of creative consultant in Australia who works sort of part-time with us. So it's almost like an in-house creative agency that works for Hnry.
That's awesome. And would be fun as well, like you said, with the pace that you guys work, actually being able to conceptualize, put to market, validate really, really quickly. It would definitely keep it interesting. There's nothing worse than still working on that same thing 4 months later, and still not having it in front of the market's eyeballs. That's not a good space to be.
Yeah, totally. But like, I guess going back to like being on a shoestring budget, right? Like if your budget is 10K a month, you're only putting that creative on Meta basically, so people are only watching on a phone, and like basically all you need to shoot a new piece of creative is a phone. Like you don't need a fancy camera or anything. Like user generated content, it pains me to say it, but it's amazing for marketing, right? It's really like well scripted messaging combined with social proof. And those two things are very powerful in a marketer's hands, right?
So what I'm hearing now is that we probably need to make sure that whoever signs off on your marketing budget doesn't listen to this podcast.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I don't know.
No, but I love the mindset. I really do. But I think what you're kind of touching on there is that you guys have an approach to making lots of really sharp, fast, snappy decisions. How do you then go about the bigger things, like the move into Australia and what that go-to-market rollout looked like? How did you guys approach those bigger decisions?
Yeah, I mean, and those aren't sort of marketing decisions; those are sort of wider business decisions. And we've got a great team of people in the business who spends months and pour through a bunch of data to sort of figure out what the next territory is, who our target customers are going to be in those markets, who our first customers are going to be. So we've got a tremendous asset in that we've got a lot of people throughout the business that we can tap on to sort of figure out what our strategy should be going next. It's not just the marketing team deciding in a silo; it's a bigger business sort of play.
But is marketing part of that process? When you talk about opening up a new territory, at what stage does your marketing function get brought into that discussion?
Yeah, it's all sort of combined together, right? Because in order to figure out how we're going to grow, how quickly we're going to grow in a new territory, we need to look at the history of what's happened in marketing, what's been successful, what hasn't, and then sort of almost as a thought exercise, apply that to how it and think about how it might work in a new territory. So yeah, marketing are absolutely involved in those sorts of business decisions.
Okay, look, we've touched on some really, really interesting topics for this conversation so far. We started off with going from being employee number 12 to having almost 12 of them reporting to you, which is, that's a big shift. There's a big journey there. We've talked about that startup and small budget mindset and the benefit of that when it comes to actually making smart decisions. The growth from being a smaller team to managing bigger budgets and what that looks like, as well as in your approach to going out. And I really like how candid you are in talking about the managing of brand marketing when you've come from a performance background. So is there any kind of advice, tips, reading, anything outside even the sphere of marketing that you would recommend other marketers on that journey should consider or look into?
Well, when we hire someone onto the team at Hnry, the first thing we put on their plate is CXL. Do you know CXL?
No, take me through it.
It's basically a sort of an online learning course for marketers. It's like a whole set of courses. Basically, it started by Pep Laya, I think.
Oh, Pete Blaha from Winter.
Yeah, that's right, from Winter. Yeah. So this was, I think it was his first business, which is basically sort of an online learning program for marketers. And it started as a conversion rate optimization course, just like a single course. And it was like the gold standard for what online learning should be for marketers. Highly recommend that course. But it's since been expanded, and it's sort of the whole remit of marketing. So if you want to learn about how to do brand marketing or how to do sort of website analytics or stuff like that, like you can just go to CXL. So whenever we have a new starter, there's almost certainly like a module or a set of courses that is relevant to what they'll be doing here, especially if they're sort of in more of a junior role. We just sort of put that in front of them and say, 2 to 3 hours a week, just spend and, look at these resources. And there's a lot of sort of practical sort of learning exercises that you do as part of it. Just brilliant. Highly recommend.
Fantastic. That sounds like an excellent sort of boot camp to get anyone up to speed and up to a certain standard.
Yeah.
How about then at the leadership end of the spectrum? Because managing a team of people and leading a team of people as well. Like, are there any areas that you've kind of read into and learned from? And it could be formal learning, it could be on the fly, it could even be someone that from a completely different walk of life.
In terms of leadership, learning is very much, for me, it's been learned by doing. Like, you kind of have to, I don't know, get in the weeds yourself. You have to make some mistakes and sort of learn from there. And I sort of, I have some great leaders in the business around me that I can sort of look to and ask questions to. So it's very much sort of a practical, pragmatic, hands-on sort of learning approach I've taken to that. And I've got sort of leadership experience from other aspects of my personal life as well. So it hasn't been a huge sort of shift for me. but yeah, I'm a big believer that, we're lifelong learners, and whenever we make a mistake, there's a chance to learn from it. And I think that applies particularly to sort of leadership.
I'm fully with you on that. So, are there any kind of closing thoughts that you would give, or ideas that you would suggest to someone who is, let's say, marketing manager? They've maybe got 2 people working, reporting back to them, and the opportunity of more. What advice would you have appreciated back then when you were in that stage?
I think it's got to come back to hiring. Hiring is so important. We've hired some crucial people over the years. I think a little bit of patience is required. As an example, we just got a contract signed for sort of a second digital marketer here at Hnry, and we opened this role in January, and we've been through half a dozen recruiters and a bunch of different pushes to get this role filled, and we haven't been able to find the right person. I don't know what that's accountable to. I don't know if it's a really tough market for digital marketers. Maybe you can speak to that, but we just found it really tough, a tough role to hire. And at several places along the way, I was like, should we compromise and just hire this person? But going back to that process, like hiring the wrong person is going to set us back. So, and being patient is the right way to go. So trust the process and be patient, and eventually you're going to find the right person.
I think that applies to more than just hiring. Trust the process and be patient. Again, it's a perfect reflection of the brand piece that we talked about earlier on. It also extends to your own career development. Making sure that you take things at a good pace. So that's fantastic. There's been so much in this conversation to unpick, and thank you so much for coming and joining on the show.
Not a problem. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic.